Hi, everyone. I'm Josette Sheeran. I've had at least 5 lives, as one of our speakers said, but one of them has been being on the front lines of really the worst human suffering in the world, running the World Food Program, which is responsible in the system to prevent starvation if 5,000 or more people are gathered anywhere in the world who could starve. So it's a massive organization, I think judged the most effective in the UN, but we were feeding, when I was there, half of Somalia, half of Afghanistan. And we were having a conversation last night about some of the frontline life-saving benefits of partnerships and how radically the world shifted from a time when my team said dealing with any company or anyone on Wall Street was dealing with the devil, to now really a new era of life-saving partnerships. But also, after that, I was Klaus Schwab's deputy at the World Economic Forum to really merge the business, humanitarian, developmental platforms into joint action. And to leverage that up, we built a platform of about 300 to 400 million of joint investments that were really helped change things. So I want to thank all of you. We'll talk more about it, for caring and putting your knowledge and assets in this direction.
My name is Maurizio Totte. Just to introduce myself to those that were not present this morning. I'm not up to 5 lives like my colleague on my right. I sort of am back to the roots. When I was 18 years old, to sort of flee the possible communist takeover of Italy, we bought some land. I went to Argentina with my father's money, and we bought some land and we planted 1 million trees. That was the start of being an impact investor before the term was even invented. Then I finished my studies in Italy. I worked to become the CEO of Europe's largest shopping mall, which was sold 4 months before Lehman went bust. And so in my third life, so to say, I came back to the roots of being a conscious impact investor, developing large and scalable assets that produce a good return. I'm always quite angry when I see those young demonstrators lambasting businesses for exploiting the planet as if it was either business or the environment. The intelligent way is to do business respectful for the environment, because definitely we won't go back to the Stone Age by avoiding all kind of technology that has provided us with progress, in my view.
I'm Monique Pham, one of the founding partners of Pact VC. We invest across 3 themes that we kind of broadly cover as impact investors. It's called access, betterment, and climate. We call them the ABCs. We don't necessarily kind of market ourselves as an impact fund, but given kind of we're 3 women from very different kind of backgrounds and kind of minority backgrounds, impact is kind of essentially embedded in our DNA. So we essentially view, we have certain kind of impact metrics we track when we're doing pre and post investment, which we can get into later. But yeah, so we're a £30 million fund, typically investing in pre-seed and seed investments across the UK and Europe.
I'm Nigel Kershaw, I'm chair of the Big Issue Group. For those not in the UK, the Big Issue is probably the most well-known social enterprise.
I think your mic's not on. Or the battery. There you go.
Hello?
Switch it up. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Nigel Kershaw. I'm chair of the Big Issue Group. For those not from the UK, it's probably the most well-known social enterprise in the UK. Probably don't know is that we have an investment arm. So last year we invested in 138 social enterprises in the UK, ranging from all focused on dismantling of poverty. Dismantling is the word. I don't want revolving philanthropy. I can't stand the hand up, hand out stuff, and that's why we're here. And that's why we were co-founded by Gordon Roddick, the co-founder of The Body Shop, changed the face of the high street, where people started to understand that you could actually buy goods and you could create a different world. So we come from that tradition, invested in 138 social enterprises, impacted around 2.1 million people. In the public market space, we co-founded with Columbia Threadneedle, the UK Social Corporate Bond Fund, now 420 million, with Aberdeen, the Climate Solutions Fund, and also the Big Exchange, which for me, and the big thing I think for the conversation is, for me, is the democratization of capital and the democratization of impact. And so we have 19 partners, about 60 odd funds, 60 billion under administration, and they're all graded as the impact of what they're doing for solutions. So I love that thing before. One is starting with impact, own your own identity, brilliant. Love that, because that's the way we start.
Fair enough. Sophia?
Oh, sorry. And the other thing was, which I just throw in there, because when that discussion was going on about what's happening in the UK, I don't think anybody really talked about policy. For example, if we persuaded the government to incentivize McDonald's or Burger King to have a plant burger 50p cheaper than a normal burger, you will change the hearts and minds of millions and millions and millions of people, and that'll drive change, and that'll drive impact investment that creates real change, just as when unleaded petrol took over from leaded. I've said too much, I know, but I always do.
Hi, my name is Sophia Swire, and I've been a philanthropist since 1988, when I put a life and career in the city on hold for over 30 years, went off to the Hindu Kush to tackle the rise of radical Islam by setting up schools for girls. So I did that for a decade, and I funded it partly through sales of my Pashmina business. I started the Pashmina boom, having discovered the workshop in the Himalayas where these were produced. And the person who came in after me, I was the first Westerner, was Anita Roddick, Gordon Roddick's wife. Yeah. And I then spent years in Afghanistan working with the Ministry of Mines and Petroleum to try and stem the flow of smuggled gemstones into Pakistan. And decided to come back to investing and finance a couple of years ago, and was about to launch a venture capital fund for women. Some of you in the audience here know that JEDI, Gender Equity Diversity Investment, we were just about to launch it when Afghanistan fell. And because I have a 30-plus year track record there, I was contacted by desperate girls and women begging for their lives. So we pivoted the task force for JEDI towards future brilliance. We've evacuated hundreds and hundreds of at-risk women, judges, lawyers, and others, including Sharbat Gula, the green-eyed Afghan girl, the cover girl from the National Geographic, who I met for the first time in Rome last week. So we're now winding down because we found asylum for 90% of our people. We've been doing this through a non-profit that I set up called Future Brilliance. And so I have a sort of rather, I guess, unique life of having straddle both philanthropy and investing. I've also been investing exclusively in female-founded impact businesses since about 2015. So with Monica, I think we share a passion for impact, and we're both founders of, I think, a first-time VC. Thank you.
Sorry, multitasking? All right, so how do we optimize all this? Maybe I'll just say, if you were at the World Economic Forum, right, which is such a great organization, and what you're doing, it feels like a lot of it we could do better if we were just connecting. We're not so siloed, because we're all sort of doing. Maybe the fund business should keep on doing, and you should be co-investing with other people. But that to me is like a theme of interconnecting. How can we optimize this, whether at least interconnecting or otherwise, as you sort of, if you had a magic wand, it can bring these organizations together?
So to me, the big gap, if we go back 20 years, was both the willingness to work together, the trust, and there was a lot of distrust both on the professional business side, finance side, thinking the not-for-profit world was not capable or, didn't measure things properly, all of that. So bringing in proper accounting and methodologies there, but also the huge distrust in the not-for-profit world in the past in business. Once you get over this kind of creating the trusted table, really the matchmaking. And to me, the biggest tragedy still today is so many effective solutions out on the front line suffer from knowing where to match the solution. I'll give you one example that I said last night at dinner. My first week on the job at the World Food Program, 37 of our drivers were kidnapped and missing in action in Darfur. And WFP has the sole way to feed 4 million people a day who are trapped in a hostile desert, and everyone wants them dead. And so we have to keep those supply chains open, and those drivers are the world's heroes. And I asked the team, I was just there a week, I said, where are the trucks? They said, we don't know. I said, where do the satellite trackers tell us the trucks are? This is not rocket science. This is just normal business. They said, we have no satellite trackers. I said, how can you be the World Food Program and not have satellite trackers? Our people are vulnerable all over the world. And I happily announced that I ran back to my office and called the CEO of one of the world's most successful, biggest companies who do this as like one little microscopic part of what they do, who offered to send a team 3 days later to solve the problem and pay for it and get it done for us. This is worth probably, $1 billion in IP and whatever they developed. And the team said, we're not meeting with the devil. And I said, first of all, let me just put on the table who I am as your new leader here. If the devil can help rescue our drivers, I'm going to meet with him and figure out what's on his or her mind. But secondly, wow, what's going on here in the UN system where in many of the organizations like WHO, many of you may know, it was illegal for the staff to meet with private sector. So solving these barriers, and it's part of what we did at the WEF, but where I really applaud your work, because activating family offices and others who can come together based on shared knowledge and passion is still untapped and can be a huge resource and so fulfilling, I think, in the ultimate test, which I call the children or grandchildren table. When you come home at night and they say, what do you do? Often it's, we solved, we prevented night blindness in a whole country for kids. What's the story, the narrative of your family office that you're passing on, right? And matching up those passions, that knowledge, that capacity to work together. That's what I wanted to
No,
really say thank you for.
Because we have a prison problem in the U.S., but the Koch brothers and let's say the left and the right can all get together on that issue. Actually, that starts them talking, which hasn't, in our social media echo chambers, it's a different issue.
I may follow up on this. Back in the States, I have many friends who are much wealthier than I am, but they still have the sort of the century before last mentality. You spend your business life as a robber baron, and then you become a philanthropist, giving away the money that you have earned in a very competitive way. And I always say, well, it's not either or. There is a way called impact investing where you can do both at the same time. You can make money doing good. And to me, this is really the key to expand this doing good in a very efficient way. The Americans are very pragmatic, how to get the most bang for the buck, okay? So the money available for philanthropic investment is a fraction of a percentage of the investable funds into bonds, shares, mutual funds, etc. If you just get a small percentage of the conventional investment with conventional return, and you focus them on return first impact investing. There is also impact first impact investing where you just get concessionary returns, but then they would say, yeah, but that's nearly philanthropy. No, I want to get market returns. And if you tell those people that are just investing normally, well, you can get the returns you're used to, but instead of just getting the financial return, you get a return in climate, environment, social, well, wouldn't you want to do it? And I think this is especially important because with the NextGen, you have lots of young people, especially young girls, who are more sensitive to the issues of climate, of environment, of people. And they often feel ashamed of sort of being the next generation of a huge fortune. Okay? Oh my God, with all that money and where that comes from, it's not as bad as meeting with the devil, but close, you know? And even more so, it's within your family. So I see impact investing as the fantastic chance of not having the next gen just wanting to get the hands on the money, either refusing it or wanting to get the hands of the money just to give it away, but seeing it as a tool that can be used to do good, to do something positive, and just instead of just getting on the streets and demonstrating, well, buy the next forest, protect it, do some sustainable harvesting, some sustainable forestry, or build a solar power plant. I wouldn't necessarily invest in the oil business, but you know, it's you can do lots of things to make the world a better place and still make money. And this is why I'm so focused on return first impact investing, because I think this is the easiest bridge how to get to that enormous pool of conventional investing and directing part of it into something which doesn't reduce their returns. On the contrary, it gives them perhaps certain protection. There has never been a blowout like Deepwater Horizon at the solar power plant, you know? So perhaps you can even have a added security to your...
My guess is Monique is seeking, you know, top-tier returns.
Yeah, which couldn't agree more with what you've mentioned. I mean, which is why in my introduction I said we don't necessarily market ourselves as an impact investor. Kind of side note, we have 3 women from ethnic minority backgrounds. You automatically get bucketed into like, oh, it's really kind of, you know, you're doing impact. Isn't that great? You know, it's kind of traditionally investors don't think impact and really great returns can go hand in hand, which is absolutely what we focus on. My point, kind of to add on to what you were saying, is not only this kind of transfer and kind of generational wealth from, let's say, the kind of boomers to the next generation. We're seeing a lot of opportunities such as democratizing access to finance. For example, we were looking at an investment opportunity that was providing kind of private markets, kind of investments, and people can invest in deals from as little as £1,000, which is not anything new, right? We've seen this before. However, making this mainstream, making this some cool part of a club, or kind of making it accessible for people from their early 20s to mid 30s, for example, we're just picking that group just because they're the ones that we reference. You know, university students saying, I'd invest in this, I'd put 500, yes, it's a luxury, but I'd put £200 towards this, I'd put £500 or even 1,000 plus. So I think there's a different, that change in mindset is kind of trickling down to kind of super early stage, kind of innovative businesses launched by really interesting founders. I mean, just in my peer group alone of kind of emerging managers, similar age group, similar backgrounds. I mean, we were asylum seekers from, you know, Turkey. You know, I came when I was 3 months older. It's like the way we even perceive deals is very different to your traditional type of investors, which is why we don't say impact. We want this to be the mainstream, and I'm quite optimistic and hopeful that our this next generation of fund managers see that impact as kind of part of the DNA, as opposed to a side thought or an afterthought or something kind of just greenwashing for the sake of it. So that's how I perceive it. I'm quite optimistic for the future, and there are super kind of really interesting opportunities to invest in the space as well.
Yeah, we're impact investors. And both in the private and the public markets. And I think you have to remember the public markets, because that is where the huge that's where I think you can make enormous changes, as well as in the private market. So don't write off the public market. So that's what we've done with the big exchange, with the, and you know, all those funds you can put in your ISA, your pension, they are definitely financial and return. And in the private markets, interestingly, you can do, I hate the word concessionary, by the way, because what you're saying is that we, the impact investors or whatever, are concessionary to the financial markets. It's the other way round. It is absolutely the other way round. Why on earth would we want and I understand what you're saying, but I think it's a subjective word, concessionary, because I think the concession is the financial markets that are actually conceding our planet and our people for a return, and I would look at it that way round. And that's why I also say, when we say we're bringing impact investing to the mainstream, always said it the other way round. We're bringing the mainstream to impact investing. Why do we want to be like the mainstream? Because that's where the market failure has been, the social market failure, the planet market failure, and the financial market failure. We are changing the mainstream. We are impacting the mainstream. And I think, in the private market, there are just so many things where you actually challenge philanthropy in a great way. So we have a debt fund, for example, which is fully financial returns. If I said to you the hospices relied on people dying, you would say to me, well, that's obvious. But actually, what it is hospices rely on legacies. So they wait till they get a legacy before they can expand or renew or create better facilities. So our fund simply says, actually, we'll finance that top part of any development first, and we'll wait for your legacy. That's a $500 million market. So there are huge changes that can be done, as Martin and I was talking about, in social housing, if you start to think of that way.
So, did you want to clarify anything? Because I think you're...
I have the opportunity. I think I may have been a bit misunderstood. For instance, in Brazil, what are we doing? If we go in as the colonialists of the first world and you tell the Brazilian, you don't have to cut the forest because it belongs to all mankind and you don't care about the intrinsic value of the biodiversity, etc., that won't resonate a lot with the hungry Brazilian, okay? You have to get there by saying, hey, we have a solution to provide you with jobs, to provide you with income, for you, for your children, for your grandchildren. Because as long as the sun shines and the rain falls, the trees will always grow. So this is a permanent solution. It's not like an oil well or a mine which will sooner or later come to an end. And we can also have decent returns that will motivate any kind of financial investor, but we are doing it in an intelligent way. So I may have used the word concessionary return, but I was just referring to the fact that if you get a return like 1 or 2% in the financial world, that's considered a concessionary return, not a very high one. I'm just talking about return first impact investing with all the other positive effects.
Right.
And once you get both the high returns that incentivize the financial guys to put their money in, then you can provide the solution that will help a lot of people which otherwise just rely on destroying. They make a nice return. If you destroy the forest, the land without the trees is worth twice as much. They make 100% return just by destroying it because they don't calculate all the other values, the biodiversity, the climate protection, etc., etc. So what we are doing is sort of be a translator or a bridge trying to align the interest both of the guys that want to make money and for the locals that just want to make a living and hopefully will make a much better living for them and the future generations.
So Sophia.
So just to endorse what my fellow panelists said about the importance of not operating in silos, so many of the problems that we face are so gargantuan that if we don't all basically come to the table, there will be very little movement. And one of those examples is, to give the example of Pakistan, where I spent a lot of last year managing this rescue operation. Because of global warming, the flooding in Pakistan last year was awful. I mean, there were tens of millions of people displaced, and yet Pakistan insists on using fossil fuel as a source of electricity, brings in coal-powered plants and so on. 60% of energy consumption in Pakistan should come from run-of-river hydro, but isn't for political reasons and so on, and also because of this lack of connectivity. So when I was up in the Hindu Kush, I noticed that there were lots of philanthropic efforts to set up and run micro-hydel, they call it, micro-hydro run-of-river operations. And through these minuscule projects, they were connecting hundreds of thousands of people who were off-grid. And I said to them, listen, this is extraordinary. Why don't you scale it? And they said, oh, well, the donors don't really like to spend $500,000 on the turbines. And I said, well, why don't you privatize it? And they said, well, we're philanthropists and NGO people. We don't know how to do that. So we ran the numbers, and I went to see the Ministry of Power in Islamabad, and they laughed at me when I said that this should be commercialized, because they didn't really understand, I guess. The fact is that if you commercialize it and charge less than half of what the national grid is charging local people, you can get a 30% annual return on your investment, provided the donors come in and underwrite 50% of the cost of these turbines as opposed to 100%. So I've been putting together a consortium that includes the European Union through a local NGO, the International Finance Corporation that has said that they'll be good for 25%, plus our future fund, JEDI, which is going to be looking for female-founded businesses and operated businesses in the MENA region and Pakistan. And so this is an example of how you can actually collaborate, but you need to bring in government, you need to bring the development finance institutions. The advantage of bringing philanthropy and the aid dollars in is that you essentially underwrite the risk factor, and you can actually double your returns. And I think there needs to be far more of these kinds of out-of-the-box thinking for all the problems that we face, including the one that I'm most concerned about now, having pivoted my focus onto refugee crisis, never been something I've been focused on. But since we're looking now at Morocco and Egypt and all these sort of North African countries, I'm profoundly concerned about the climate refugee crisis, which is fast growing. And they're saying that by 2030, there'll be 200 million climate-related refugees. By 2050, that'll be 1.2 billion. And these people will be moving up from the hottest parts of Pakistan, India, but also sub-Saharan Africa. And I think it's going to involve all hands on deck to do whatever we can to mitigate the temperature rise. And there's an extraordinary project being put forward by the Vatican and others called the Great Green Wall to build forests from the west of Africa to the east of Africa, and a lot of interesting impact investment opportunities that are arising from that. But we also need to do what we can to stabilize those North African countries through economic development and private sector investment, and, of course, empowering women who are the great new untapped, overlooked resource throughout the Middle East and indeed the world.
Excellent. So we're at 5 o'clock, which means a couple of things. One is we're going to move into breakouts and roundtables, but I also want to have at least a question or two or final thoughts. One of the roundtables is on impact, so this conversation will continue. The logistics of which are there's a bar that's open. We would ask you to go mingle a bit, take a break, and then we'll announce where these roundtables will be, and then we get back together in a final town hall for takeaways. Because part of the takeaways are, what do we want to do now that you've just all met on a panel? What do we want to be doing together to program? We have an impact summit every spring and fall, but we can be doing things. We want to look at all your deal flow. We want to look at your fund. Jinan, we want to show how we can use, focus on IP. Let's look at let's say whatever the subject is, water, oceans. We want to create deep dives to go deeper into this and create more connectivity and all these 360 circles. But final thoughts before you guys break. Does anyone having reflected on what everyone's been saying across the group?
So what an honor to be with this panel. And just to say, these types of consortia, I think, are the future. the World Food Program in Uganda, where the Lord's Resistance Army was, people were dependent on food aid for 40 years. I made it my business to graduate people from food aid all over the world. There, the problem was one sorting and drying facility, which cost $1.2 million, so farmers could actually sell what they produce, because it had aflatoxins in it. No government would fund it. And I had to go begging around the world to the private sector. But bringing down these barriers where it's legitimate to have a table where you bring business and the UN and the IFEs and everyone together to solve the problem is the only way we're going to be able to nail that. So I've seen the power of that all over the world. Yeah.
I may say something slightly controversial. In the first Wall Street movie, there was the famous quote by Gordon Gekko, the character, "Greed is good." I say greed is excellent, but you have to be greedy for a social return, you have to be greedy for a climate return, you have to be greedy for an environmental return, and not just for a financial return. And if you really want to achieve all these things, the planet will be a better place. And by the way, the Earth has existed with temperatures far below or far in excess of what it is now. It just would be damn uncomfortable for the 8 billion humans that are living on the planet right now.
Parting thoughts. I also visited northern Uganda when I was 19, built a honey making cooperative in Lira, went out there on my own, which is something I'd not do right now. But kind of, I mean, in terms of part, also Nigel, I did write to you when I was, during that same time, asking you to fund my business as well. Really? When I was about 19, 20. But yeah, I think, look, obviously my kind of co-panelists have kind of a far more significant experience in this space than I have, and we're just beginning launching our fund. But as I mentioned, kind of this has been kind of something that I've been and my team have been extremely passionate about since we were kind of very, very young. And as I mentioned, I think the future is heading kind of in the right direction. And look, we're talking about kind of very serious and deep and kind of really important issues, but I think we can also go kind of back to basics in terms of everyday life. I mean, on our own kind of, home turf, looking at how people can, whether it's accessing kind of healthcare services or kind of SMEs, kind of having access to technology that kind of large enterprises typically have. So I think there's a lot of opportunities we can look at that's not necessarily just tied to kind of these large kind of serious issues, whereas, we can make an impact with baby steps as well regarding, things that we interact in our day-to-day lives.
I just want to think there's a wonderful visionary.
Why didn't you fund her back then?
What? I'm going to.
You never write back to me.
I'm joking. Joking.
Oh, didn't I? That must be my team. I would have.
All right, sorry.
A wonderful visionary, William Blake, who wrote, "What is now proved was once only imagined." And I think that for me is, like when we went out for our first Impact LP all those years ago, I pitched 630 people to get 22 LPs. Now they know what we're talking about. We have moved the mainstream. So I think let's just, we have done something quite incredible in this world by actually believing that we can change it through business and through finance. And the second takeaway for me is what my mind is going on now is, and I agree with what you're saying about that imperialist nature, we must actually not have people who really don't understand poverty, have never fought poverty, never been there, saying, this is what you need to be. This is what we need to ask people we're claiming to be impacted, have they been impacted? It's more than data, it's all about people for me.
I would endorse that. I think respect for humanity is critical when you design any solution, and that involves listening to people on the ground. It involves listening to women on the ground, not just men. It also involves having a slightly different approach to investing and impact investing, and if you have capital to deploy, then please consider first-time female-led funds. Do write back to those ladies who write to you. Because the fact of the matter is that women, we do things slightly differently. We do have a diverse way of doing things. One of the things we do is we're twice as likely to invest in female-led companies. And female-led companies are more sustainable, they return more on capital, and they also exit faster than male-led companies. So what's not to love?
They're also cheaper valuation-wise.
Overlooked and undervalued.
Absolutely. Undervalued, but for an investor, that's a great thing.
Absolutely. Especially in this environment, they're more robust as well. Thank you.
So, thank you.
Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.